Welcome to our talk at PlatformCon. My name is Alex, and I'm here with my colleague Kim. We are working for a software consultancy company called Embark, and we're doing consultancy on topics around software architecture. And today we want to discuss the question whether the adoption of an internal developer platform should be mandatory or voluntary for development teams.
Well, Alex, from my point of view, the usage of the internal developer platform should absolutely be mandatory. We put so much resources, so much effort, so much time into ideas surrounding deployment pipelines, runtime environments, service blueprints. So everything that is valuable to us is condensed into this platform. So how to better get maximum return on investment, if not just making it mandatory?
Okay, so what you're saying is that you have all these platform services and you want to have as much users on those platform services as you can, and that's why you want to mandate that. And I think that's right in theory, but the thing is, if you mandate all of these services, then you lose an important feedback mechanism because all of your teams would be required to use those platform services. You don't have the feedback if your platform services provide any values to your team, right? So on a voluntary case, you would say that you would provide these services to your teams as an offer, and then they use the offer or they don't. But if you, for example, would recognize that 80% of your teams do not use your service blueprints, then maybe your service blueprints do not provide value to the development teams.
Well, but even if that should be the case, how do we make sure that developers don't get too creative? I mean, we have a lot of unexperienced developers. We collaborate with tons of external service providers, and it's really, really important to us that we govern a safe environment for our development teams.
But here you have kind of like the same thing, right? Because if you have a platform team that builds these guardrails and tries to provide a safe environment for your development teams, you again do not know if this environment that they are building is indeed one that is valuable to the team and one that is a safe environment for more junior developers. Because again, you would force everybody to use the platform, so you would have no feedback mechanism on the platform.
But how do we then make sure that we don't have any uncontrollable growth? I mean, if they can just use whatever and they could just use everything from the outside as well, we would have tons of things running inside our internal development.
So I don't think that to work against this uncontrollable growth you're mentioning, I don't think that you would have to make your platform mandatory to do that. Because if you provide platform services, like you said, like deployment pipelines, runtime environments, service blueprints for teams, and these service blueprints provide value to development teams, then they will use it anyhow. So you will not have uncontrollable growth in that case. So I have a question for you. In your situation, you would say teams have a certain standard, we enforce these standards, and would you allow teams to divert from that standard? Are teams allowed to do that?
No, absolutely not. As I said before, we put so much thought into it, and deviation wouldn't be needed. And the return on investment and the adherence to our governance is so major.
Okay, so I think the problem with this approach is twofold. So the first thing is that you kind of hinder innovation because you have these centrally governed rules by the platform that teams must follow, and they would not have an idea, they would not divert from this standard path, right? So the standard path kind of like becomes this center of innovation, and you can't like use teams to try new things because they are not allowed to divert from that path. I think that's a big problem. And the second problem, I think, is that this approach leads to something that's called shadow infrastructure, which happens when teams have like special requirements and the platform does not provide these the groundwork for these special requirements, then what would happen is that development teams would provision their own infrastructure besides their platform. And this shadow infrastructure is then not maintained or not governed or not monitored, because they would not tell you that they have this shadow infrastructure because they diverted from your standard path.
Well, but in case they would need something else, they could just write a ticket to the platform team, and the platform team can just implement promptly what development teams need.
Okay, I think that's a good approach in theory, but the problem here again turns out when the platform team becomes necessary for feature teams or for development teams to implement their features, right? So for example, if I'm a development team and I need something from the platform in order to build my feature, then I would have to go to the platform team and they would need to implement something for me, then the platform team obviously has multiple development teams, right? And all of those development teams come to the platform team and have requirements, and they suddenly need to prioritize between development teams, right? And the platform team can then become a bottleneck, and you will get into a situation where you would have a lot of finger pointing, because the development team could then say, yeah, we can't deliver because we have to wait for the platform team. And that's a situation that I really don't like.
And how would that be different in a voluntary situation?
Because in a voluntary situation, teams would be able to divert from the platform. So if they have special needs, and if they have, or if they need to implement something that the platform does not provide, then teams can divert from the standards that is provided by the platform. And then again, the platform teams can recognize this. They can recognize that teams are diverting from the standards they have set out, and they can use this as a feedback mechanism to enhance their platforms. Because if they see that they have a standard path, for example, a service blueprint, and teams are diverting from that a lot, they can talk to the teams what they are doing differently, and then incorporate that again into the platform. And that is something that you completely use in a mandatory, that you completely lose in a mandatory situation.
Okay, but what really is difficult for me to grasp is hierarchy is there for a reason, right? We have decision power in our hierarchy, and our developers, I don't think they want to be responsible for those like really difficult situations. Am I diverting? What am I diverting to? They would probably answer something like, I'm not even paid accordingly. So they wouldn't probably even divert at all.
Okay. So what I think is really important is that if you have development teams, these development teams have requirements they need to build, they have features they need to build, and they have certain goals regarding security or availability of their services they have to fulfill. And teams need to know those things, and they need to have the freedom to do whatever is necessary to achieve that. This is the job of development teams, and the job of a platform team would then be to make it as easy as possible for the development teams to achieve their goals, right? And this is the approach that kind of like is the best advantage from a voluntary perspective, is that you can offer this service to development teams that they can use that makes their job easier. But if development teams have certain special requirements, then they can divert from the standard paths laid out by the platform. So the platform is really a service, really an offering for teams, instead of something that guards them in their freedom.
As we just discussed, there might be reasons for mandatory adoption of a platform. If you think about efficiency, standardization, if you think about return on investment, the controlling of costs, the adhering to regulation, to governance, or even missing trust in your development teams, this could be arguments you hear, but we think those are only on the surface.
Because we think that if you make a platform mandatory to achieve that, this could be a trap. We think that a platform should establish a path of least resistance. That should be the goal of a platform. So that means that going the established way should be easy for development teams, but diversion should still be possible. And this can only be done by making a platform voluntary. Because if your platform is mandatory, there is no path of least resistance, but there is only one possible path. And this is bad because when teams can't divert, they can't innovate. They can't use special tools they need for their requirements, for example. If they would need a special programming language because this programming language provides a library they need, they can't divert. And there is no way to innovate. There is no way for teams to fulfill their requirements they might have, which are special, which are different from the standard. There are some exceptions where rules and standardizations are necessary. These are mainly centrally technical topics like logging, common logging, authentication, authorization, service discovery, and things like that.
But besides what Alex just mentioned, we think platforms and platform usage should be voluntary. For that to be possible and for that to be really, really helpful for your organization, we think it's also necessary that your platform team members actually adopt a product mindset. They should be listening to their customers, and those are the developers. They should have in mind that a good development experience is key. So for making those customers really, really happy, it's necessary that they actually talk to them. It's necessary that they actually use the feedback they get. So whenever development teams would divert, this is a very, very good source for feedback and gather new ideas and actually develop the platform services further. So what we think is key is that a broad platform adoption by providing value to developer teams is way more interesting and should be enforced by the voluntary situation instead of mandating the adoption. So following what we were just discussing and following what our point of view is, now we would like to know what your point of view is. So please let us know, how are you actually adopting the platforms in your companies? Do you have a mandatory situation? Do you have a voluntary situation? Are hybrids possible? We would be really, really interested to discuss this with you. So please feel free to contact us. And in case you would like to have the slides we just showed you, or like to get to know us even a little bit better, then here is the download to our slides and the contact possibilities. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for having us.